move on to the Chargers, the team who did make the playoffs and then found a way to completely implode. It kind of reminded me of that. I'm showing my age here, but that Houston Oilers Buffalo Bills playoff game all those years ago when I think Frank Reich led the Bills back from a crazy deficit, and it was similar enough in the playoff game against the Jags. And I'm going to go first on this one because I've shown on this show over the course of the last 2 years now, got him, my love for Brandon Staley. Well, there isn't any, and I was quite surprised that he found a way to navigate his position and keep hold of his job after the playoff game. And as we touched on, Joe Lombardi seemed to be the fall guy, and there was a lot of play calling in that game. In particular, when they were leading, where they were throwing the ball when it wasn't necessary. They should have been running the ball and running the clock and keeping the Jags offense off the field. But I suppose let's not get into the specifics of one game. I've referred to what they've done in terms of during the offseason. I look at what they brought in acquisitions, and they haven't done a lot because, again, they were kind of where they are in the cap. Eric Kendricks, linebackers, come in from the Vikings, who, in fairness, has been a very serviceable linebacker throughout the course of the years, and they brought in Williams from the Giants, a defensive tackle, who in his own right can be serviceable over the course of the season. He did really well for the Giants last year. But that's about the extent of it. And like the main storyline this offseason, obviously, was the coordinator situation and Austin Eckler looking for a trade, but it seemed like he was only kind of trying to make a move to finally get the contract, which he felt he deserved. Colin, I'll start with you on the Chargers. I mean, is it a status quo situation in terms of they feel they've got the players around them and they've gone wide receiver this year in the first round of the draft, as opposed to the last couple of years where they've looked to protect Herbert? They're trying to give him more players and be in a position to have an aggressive offense. But it's defense last year, and it's supposed to be a defensive-minded head coach. I read a quote last week: if Brandon Staley can get out of the way of his own management, they should be fine. What your thoughts on the situation?
Yeah, like, and I think sometimes, like, I think Staley's obviously, he's very, very bright, right? You hear that when he speaks, but he is very inexperienced. And I think a lot of this year and ultimately how far the Chargers go will depend on two things. One, injuries, because it's the Chargers, and we know that they are blighted year in, year out by injury. The other asterisk is probably what way can the Chargers charger it up. 2010 will forever be number one offense, number one defense, 32nd on special teams, and oops. But it's all about Herbert, right? And essentially, Connor said earlier they were delighted to show Lombardi the door, and they were because Shane Steichen had worked with Herbert in year one, and Herbert just looked phenomenal. Now, Joe Lombardi isn't a guy who is super aggressive, likes it, or takes lots and lots of chances. Also, I guess Herbert was playing hurt for some of last year. We saw him take that shot against the Chiefs and with the broken ribs, and he played through it. So we know he's super tough, but it's going to be interesting to see with Kellen Moore, because Mike McCarthy's comments about Kellen Moore when Kellen Moore left, I should be music to the ears of the Chargers and to Justin Herbert. Mike said, why was Kellen gone? Because we disagreed. He wants to light up the scoreboard and I want to run the damn football. If you have a quarterback with the quality of Justin Herbert, I think you want to light up the scoreboard. And I think it'll be interesting to see. I keep going back to it. I've referred to it a few times, but I think it makes sense to look at Matthew Stafford and to look at the difference that offensive coordinators had on Matthew Stafford's career and his yards per attempt. And I think that's where Kellen Moore could make a real difference. They have Ian Herbert. They have an absolutely incredible quarterback. They have some great pieces on defense, but they have to stop being. I mean, if you want to, they are Spurs. I mean, that's who the Chargers are. And do you trust them? Do you believe in them? I mean, it is ultimately, there's a feeling that, and I like them and I like lots of the players, but there is a feeling, it's a bit like when Ferguson famously went into the United dressing room and said, lads, it's Spurs. And you can imagine Doug Pederson going into the Jags locker room, and we know from Peyton Manning, you don't make adjustments at halftime, but he just walks in and just says, lads, it's the Chargers. And so do you believe in them? Do you trust them? Like the Broncos have been so bad for so long, and yet they've been able to bully the Chargers. So I think that is something that the Chargers have to change as well, because teams have been able to bully them, and that has been an issue for them. There are big questions, but the one thing that's probably a blessed relief for Chargers fans is nobody's talking about them winning the offseason. And my goodness, were they off-season champions for probably 7 of the past 10 years. So I think they'll be delighted that monkey ear is no longer attached to them.
Conor, when we did our wildcard picks for that weekend, Colin just reminded me, I think his final line on this game was, "They're too sportsy for me, I'll go with the Jags." And so do you buy into the Chargers? Do you believe that this potentially, and Colin has just touched on, they were the champions of the offseason last year. That's slowly starting to come back a little bit, Colin. I listened to a couple of podcasts this week, and the question was, which teams do they expect to make a huge upward turn based on what they did last year? And the Chargers, there seems to be a team that's in hot commodity in terms of keeps coming up. Where are you on this Chargers team? Do you buy into the hype? Well, you can buy into the Herbert hype. It's whether they have the players around them and ultimately have the players to dig out difficult games and wins.
Like Colin, I kind of want to like them, and that there's a lot about them to like, and yet you can't deny the evidence of everything you've ever seen in your NFL watching history either, which is that they just find new ways to throw away promising situations and lose time and time again. Like the last 2 seasons for Staley have been defined by missing the playoffs 2 seasons ago when they seemed like they were absolutely on a roll, and they found a way to stumble over the last couple of fences and rule themselves out. And then by that horrific collapse last year, which just showed so many things that you do not want to see in your team. I mean, even a star player like Joey Bosa losing it the way he did, it's shocking to watch. Unsportsmanlike conduct penalty. Peterson goes for 2 points and they lose the game by 1. It certainly wasn't all on Bosa, but when even the guys who you're expecting to lead in those difficult moments are losing it, what does that tell you about what it's like behind the scenes? They're just unable to hang tough. The last thing you want to see in your football team. Having said all that, we don't know really how much that injury hampered Justin Herbert. Him being as tough as he is, and he's so big and such a specimen that when he says he's shaking something like that off, you kind of want to believe that he's pretty much impervious to damage. But that has got to have restricted him greatly, and to be fair to Joe Lombardi, after all we said, probably affected the play calling too, and what was or wasn't on the table. But as you called out rightly, Brian, when you have Austin Eckler, why are you not running the leather off the ball from that situation? Like, this guy averaged 19 touchdowns over the past 2 seasons. He's exactly the kind of guy that you want grinding it up when you have a big lead, as they did. But on every level, the play calling, Brandon Staley's weird logic about he's the analytics guy, and yet he seems to inevitably make the wrong moves in the wrong situations. Although, speaking of flawed logic, like, I love that Mike McCarthy line about Kellen Moore lighting up the scoreboard, because you see how all those teams that light up the scoreboard never win anything. Like these pass heavy offenses, like the Chiefs or the Bengals or the Bills or the Eagles, you want to light up the scoreboard, I'm sure they'd be more than happy to take that in Los Angeles. And I think, it's the corollary of what we were saying with the Broncos. I think that's an upgrade at OC, and I'm kind of excited to see what Kellen Moore does to Justin Herbert. Got an awful lot out of Dak Prescott on that Cowboys offense, whatever Mike McCarthy will say. And I think McCarthy's not really fooling anyone there. Kellen Moore is the scapegoat for his failings. Now, by the same token, is he going to be enough to make up for what we've seen, as you called out, Brian, in terms of Brandon Staley's failings? And I kind of have a soft spot for Staley. He certainly was a loyal servant with Chicago and played his part in that fearsome Vic Fangio defense, which was probably a championship caliber defense until we drafted Mitch Trubisky and threw away that chance. But I find it hard to like, I can see them finishing second in the division, as we were saying. I can see them potentially making the playoffs. Herbert is a guy that you just love seeing see playing at his best, and I'm kind of excited to see what Kellen Moore can do with them. And they do have, you know, an awful lot of exciting players on offense, and they could light it up and they could surprise us. So, you know, as you say, they'll probably be delighted that nobody's really talking about them in those terms. There's a path out of the division and there's a path to the playoffs, but culturally, I wonder what's going on in that locker room. I wonder if Staley is the leader they need. I seriously doubt it, and everything that we saw last season would lead me to speculate to the downside as to where they'll go if they do make it to the postseason.
Connor giving away one of his wildcard picks in June ahead of our season preview show later in the summer. We'll close out